Yeah, as long as we know she's at least on the way, I think we could go ahead and kick things off. Because first we're going to hear from Chair Pushkin, and then we'll do introductions, and we can always do Deb last. Yeah, as long as we.
All right. Well, I really just want to thank everybody for for serving on this committee. It's obviously a very important committee. It's been quite some time since the party has taken a look at its own bylaws, and I think it's a necessary function. It's a healthy function of the party to go through, see what's worked, what hasn't worked, how do we make the organization run more efficiently, more inclusively, a more fair manner. So I really appreciate all of you for stepping up to put in the work and work together on this committee. I am going to really back off from the committee and let those of you who are elected by the executive committee to serve on this rules and bylaws committee, let you all do the work and see what we come up with. So I'm really looking forward to see what y'all come up with, what y'all decide to do, and look forward to our continued work together to try to do the much needed work of improving our party. So we're able to function in a more efficient manner, more fairly, and get things back on track for the state of West Virginia. So thanks again. I really appreciate you all taking time out of your weekend to join us here.
Well, and I think I speak on all of us when I also say thanks to you and the delegates and the senators that we have in the legislature that are fighting the good fight right now. At another time, I'm sure it's only been 2 weeks, and I'm sure you've already got plenty of stories to share. So, but we'll have to do that on another time. But thanks for being here and for pulling this all together. Thanks to Katie and Ryan as well for the work they're doing to give us the Zoom and the live stream and everything as well.
Yeah, and thanks. I also want to thank our staff, Katie and Ryan, for putting in the extra time to help facilitate this meeting for everybody and streaming. So thank you all too.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and I don't think I need to share my screen just yet. But we had sort of a tentative agenda. And this is just our first meeting, so it is going to be informal, especially because we don't have a bylaws committee chair yet. We're going to elect that committee chair at our, as the first order of business at the next meeting. This is really just sort of for us to, do introductions, get to know each other, talk about our process, make sure that we're set up for success, gather resources, etc. The goal today is to get this meeting done within 1.5 hours. So we're looking at wrapping up on or before 6 o'clock. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and do roll call. And then we'll give everybody 2 minutes to introduce themselves, or up to 2 minutes, just so because I think we've all seen each other on Zoom, but maybe we haven't been able to meet in person. And also for the benefit of anybody who's watching the meeting, we want them to know, who the people are that are going to be updating the bylaws. So for the purposes of roll call, I'm just going to go ahead and note that every member of the committee is present except for Deb McCarthy. Oh, wait, there she is. Deb joined. Okay. Well, then good. So I don't think I need to call roll because every member is here in addition to staff and Nikki, our parliamentarian. And Nikki, thank you for being here as well to help us through this process. So let's just go ahead and do introductions, 2 minutes each. And I'll just go, I'll mostly go alphabetical here. But I did say Deb we'll save the best for last. We'll save you for last, Deb. And I'll just introduce myself. Shane Asadzandi. I am on the state executive committee. I'm also the chair of the county party for Monongalia County and the president of the County Chairs Association. And just looking forward to this meeting and getting this process started and really strengthening our bylaws, especially over the last year. I think we've seen a lot of instances where we went to the bylaws to figure out, how to approach this situation. And we find out that, there really, in some cases, there hasn't been a lot of guidance, or the guidance that we did have probably could have been a lot more clear. So I'm really excited to get this process started and, work on strengthening the documents that found our party here. And I'll just go alphabetical. So then, Bob, you've got your 2 minutes.
Okay. I'm Bob Baker. I'm a retired attorney in Raleigh County. I was elected to the State Executive Committee for my Senate district, and I'm also elected to the Raleigh County Executive Committee. I worked for 30 or 35 years as a legal aid attorney in Fayette and Raleigh counties. And I ran for this particular committee because I thought my experience as a lawyer would help. And also I've had some experience with working on bylaws with public broadcasting, Friends Board, and a couple others.
All right, thank you, Bob. Next, Mac Halterman.
My name is Mac Halterman, D16. I've been working to get Democrats elected all over the country for the last 10 years now. I've been a parliamentarian for 11 years. I've worked on bylaws revisions for organizations as large as 5,000 members. So this isn't my first rodeo. My hope is to evaluate the bylaws and come out of this as a stronger organization. And whatever that looks like is for us to determine. I'll have more to pitch in from time to time, but generally I'm going to sit back and listen and kind of be the Ben Franklin in the room. So, all right.
Thanks, Mac. And Nikki, although Nikki is not a member of this committee, she's going to be assisting us as parliamentarian and giving us her guidance there. So just going alphabetically, Nikki, you'd be next. So I want to yield the floor to you.
Hi, I'm Nikki. I'm the state parliamentarian. I have been registered member with the National Parliamentarians. I'm here, just as Shane said, to kind of help out as needed. And I want to thank everyone for, letting me be here and trusting me to at least answer some questions and help out as I can. And this is my cat.
Oh, there we go. We have another member. I love it. Thank you. And then next we have Maria Russo.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Russo. I am sorry to be calling from the car, but I'm currently driving from Charleston to the Eastern Panhandle. Well, I'm not driving. I'm riding. Don't worry. Riding with a friend, but I am lobbying this session with the West Virginia Environmental Council. So have been doing that work and was just in between trips. So I apologize for calling from the car, but really excited to be on this committee and be charged with this work. My background comes a lot from the side of creative process and really thinking through iterative design and how do we take something and make it more inclusive, make it better for a collective, make sure that it's representative of our ideals. So that's really what I am working to do along this process. And I feel really honored as a young person from West Virginia to be part of this team who is doing this work. So my hope is to make this as inclusive and open as possible. And that's what I'll be working to do. So thanks everybody for being here on a Friday afternoon.
Thank you, Maria. And then Judy Stevens.
Okay, I am the past chair of the Wood County Democratic Executive Committee, past co-chair of the West Virginia State County Chairs Association. I'm still on the Wood County Committee and elected to the state committee. This is my second term. I've been on the bylaws committees before when they were going through and modifying some of the language that was in there. So I bring a little bit of knowledge there to the front. And I just want to make sure that we have continuity in the bylaws. So that's why I wanted to be on the committee.
Thank you, Judy. Selena Vickers.
Hello, everybody. So I think I know everybody. I think everybody knows me. I am on the state executive committee and one of the co-chairs of the affirmative action committee. I'm the co-chair, one of the co-chairs of the women's caucus, and I'm the secretary of the Fayette County executive committee. I think where I come from is somebody that really wanted to participate in the Democratic Party to help build the party. And I was welcomed in some instances, but completely rejected outright in some instances, and asked to leave a public meeting, ridiculed. I mean, there was across the board. When I learned the rules, I learned that some of the things that our state party was doing, which I thought was very ineffective, the party was very ineffective. I found out that many of the things that they were doing, they were not supposed to do. I mean, things like equal division, which is key tenet of the party, equal division in terms of gender, and making sure that there is proportional representation of certain diversities and things like that. And when I started kind of like piecing this together and how people were excluded, I kind of fell into being somebody who really cares about the rules and have learned the rules of the party. And I think most people know I found a series of challenges that led to the DNC recognizing that West Virginia was very much out of compliance with national rules and, required them to do bylaw changes. Now, certainly there's some more things that need to be done, but that is one of the things that I very much care about. And I believe that what we are doing will really set the foundation for building the party. And I'm really glad to be a part of this. Very glad to be working with all of you, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Selena. And Ray Whiting, you're up.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ray Whiting. I'm part of the Affirmative Action Committee. I want to say thank you for inviting me to this. Selena Vickers, she's the one that brought me into this here, so into the Democrat Party. So I'm looking forward to it, and looking forward to progress, positive change, positive outcome, and this time we turn the state around.
Couldn't get myself unmuted there. All right, thanks, Ray. And then last on this list, but high on the list in our hearts, Deb McCarthy, you're up.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Unstable internet today. You saw me scramble. Yeah. Oh, geez. So my name is Deb McCarthy. I'm with the Mercer County Democratic Executive Committee and also on the state committee. And I'm vice chair of the county committee. So we're working hard down here to, to try to make some inroads. It's tough. So I think my thought is that we should try to kind of paint our vision and ideals in kind of broad strokes today, and kind of define where it is we want to go with this. I'm excited, and let me tell you guys, I will be the neophyte, unskilled, dumb bunny question asking person. So you can depend on me to be like naive and maybe ask some dumb questions that might actually be valuable. I don't know, but that's I need some education. I'm excited about being involved in this. I think we're going to make some strides in bringing the Democratic Party of West Virginia to where we really, really need and want it to be. I'm excited.
There are no dumb questions, Debbie.
Oh, I'll come up with one, I'm sure.
If you want the answer, then it's a good question.
No,
Yeah.
I actually think that, Matt, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just agreeing. That is a sentiment that we have to take going into this, is that every question, every bit of remark that we have, the more we can flesh out a discussion, the more important that is. So there isn't a question that is too dumb. And that is a mindset that really needs to be taken to heart if we're going to do this to the best of our ability. So yeah, there's no question too dumb.
No, I fully agree. And I think that's, I'm really excited about the people that were elected to this committee, because I think we do have a diversity of experiences and backgrounds, and maybe it's, some different goals as well. And I think everybody brings something unique to the table here. So we're working from a really good place. Although Deb did raise a pretty good question there, which I think I've kind of heard reflected in some other comments. And I think that it's important to have that conversation as well. So let me kind of frame how I envision the rest of this meeting to work in terms of time and pacing and subjects, and then we can go ahead and get rolling with the rest of the evening or the afternoon. We're making pretty good time here. Ryan, do I have permission to share my screen? I assume that you're the one running the Zoom.
Yeah, let me check here.
Okay.
And Shane, I just want to thank you for volunteering to lead us through this initial meeting. And I would be glad to take notes for this meeting if it would be okay with folks.
You know what, that's something we should talk about today, because we didn't put out the call for a secretary of this committee, but obviously with it us focusing on bylaws, and we're going to be doing a lot of revision and discussing a lot of topics. I think it's critical for at least one person to take notes for the meeting. Selena, if you're volunteering for that, awesome. If anybody else wants to take notes for sake of redundancy, I don't think we can't document things too much when we're starting a process like this. Plus we'll have access to the recording as well, which will certainly help. So yeah.
Shane, you should have the ability to share now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ryan. So let's put a pin in talking about how to go about having a secretary for this committee, or if we're just going to informally take notes on our own, how we want to do that. But we can cover that as one of the topics today. Let me bring up there it is. Okay. So I just kind of typed this out a couple minutes ago based on, we circulated sort of a tentative agenda by email, and there wasn't really any opposition to it. So I interpreted that as, to move forward with this. Although after Deb spoke, I did add one little thing on here to say, what's the big picture? So the way that I'm foreseeing this, inaugural meeting before we actually have more structured agendas and a bylaws committee chaired to keep things flowing, would simply be for us to sort of have open discussion among ourselves on each of these questions. So first of all, what's the big picture? What's our mission, vision, values? What are the bird's eye goal, like from a bird's eye view? What are the goals that we want to accomplish with these bylaw revisions? What are the resources that we need to succeed? Obviously, past copies of the bylaws, the parts of the state code that guide political party committees, stuff like that. We want to make sure that we're gathering that now so that we can, really hit the ground running and move forward. What's the process going to be? Because there's a lot of different ways that we could go about the process of doing the bylaws. We could, rewrite them one section at a time. We could, throw them out and start new. There's a lot of different ways that you can, begin a pretty arduous process like this. And I think that's another conversation we should have today, just for the sake of clarity and reaching consensus on, what is going to be the methodology by which we approach this. And then just wrapping up, reviewing our next meeting date, maybe setting other meeting dates beyond the next one that's already scheduled. If there are any tasks that we have to complete between now and the next meeting, we'll just say, okay, who is doing this task, and what's their deadline, and so on. And then we can at least put together an idea of what our first agenda will look like for the 10th of February. But obviously there's plenty of time for us to formalize an agenda. So we're not going to, have a finished agenda as of today, but we can at least discuss amongst ourselves, like what's going to be on that agenda, and that'll guide us to put it together. So with that, I think, to Deb's point, maybe that's where we need to begin. Like, what's the big picture? What are our goals here? Our mission, vision, values. And I'm just going to open up the floor for anybody who wants to share and contribute. Judy?
I think we need to create language that has continuity, but will be timeless in a sense. so that we don't have to come back every year, every other year and do this all over again, because we did this in 16, 17, 18, 20, 21, and we finally ended up with the latest iteration in 22. If we do it right this time, maybe we won't have to keep going back and doing that. We can make sure that there is continuity of language, that we do address things that are off balance that we need to fix, but not just in a slash and burn, let's cut this out and then replace it type thing, but be thoughtful about it.
Thank you, Judy. And I'm just gonna, once a person's done speaking, I'm just going to not speak until the next person wants to be recognized. So this is me shutting up and waiting for you. Go ahead, Bob.
I spent a bit of time looking over the bylaws, and it seems to me that there's all kinds of pictures to look at. There's some just grammar and wording fixing that needs to be done, but there's also the concepts of what problems, and I'm not sure what those were that Selena had in terms of, and you had in terms of trying to use the bylaws. That would be the more big picture things that I think we need to do. And then, making sure that they comply with state law, and that state law is either properly referenced, or which it is in a lot of the bylaws, or actually written out in some cases where it may be important to have it right in front of us when considering the bylaws. And of course, the problem with doing that is if the state changes its law, then we have to change our bylaws. So the more we reference state law without actually being specific about it, the better it is.
No, I agree with that. And to answer your question, Bob, I'll give you an example. This is something that a member of the state executive committee submitted to me, months ago, and said, hey, like, this is something that needs to be in the bylaws. And a good example is, committee members for counties and state committees are elected by gender. As you know, there's, 2 males, 2 females per Senate district, and in all the other places we have gender parity as well. And the bylaws were updated, I think, on the most recent iteration to talk about how non-binary folks factor into that. The other issue that was kind of raised to me was, what if, let's say, somebody is elected or appointed to a seat on a county committee? And I actually had this happen to me, and a couple other counties it happened as well, where let's say a person occupies a committee seat as a male member, but then they are going through the transition process. They come out as female, they go by a different name. How do you handle that when technically this person is in a male seat, but they are now female or non-binary? And, the bylaws don't say anything about that. The state code doesn't say anything about that. When that happened, when I was chair of our county committee, and this happened like in a previous iteration of the committee, I asked Belinda and the state party, and it was basically, well, there's nothing saying anything about this. So they keep their seat for the rest of the term. And then, if they run again, they have to run as the gender they are now, which makes sense in a way of how to handle that. But there's nothing in our bylaws that says when this occurs, that is what you do. So I think it's about, setting some precedents so that when situations come up, we know how it should be addressed instead of just having to guess. Does that make sense?
And I'm sure there'll be plenty of situations that we won't anticipate, and they still won't answer the question.
Yeah, Murphy's Law.
But we'll do the best we can with the knowledge that we've got. So I think that's just to give you one example of something that needs to be in the bylaws that isn't currently there.
Yeah, in our committee, we had a girl run against me for my seat as a girl. And when she didn't get it as a girl, she went ahead and was appointed as non-binary to the committee. So you're going to have all kinds of scenarios like that.
Right. So, and I think I can foresee there have been some other things that have come up in the last year where a county committee was trying to organize itself and said, hey, we want to do this. How do we do it? And then we consult the bylaws, and then we say, well, it doesn't really say. So obviously a procedure needs to be outlined in terms of, how you're going to run this election or how you're going to, manage this other thing. So I think that to me, I think is a large part of the process here is, everybody who works, with some exceptions, everybody who does this kind of work is a volunteer, right? So the more we can do to make things easier for the people that are volunteering to help us build a party and recruit candidates and win elections, the more we should do that. Deb?
Well, going back to what I said about painting our vision with broad brushstrokes, I think maybe that should be the first task we take on, is define where we want to go in idealistic terms. Shoot for the moon. Let's make a document that really defines the kind of Democratic Party we want to see. And I think if we define it first and then plug in the pieces as we go through the work, I think, and make sure that those pieces that we're plugging in match our vision, I think that might be a good way to proceed. Just an idea.
I agree.
Does everybody have a copy of the current bylaws?
Both state and national. Because a lot of what we do is supposed to be based on the Democratic National Committee in as much as the state can. So it would be a good idea, in my particular opinion, that everybody get a copy of the Democratic National Bylaws and read through those so that you have an idea of what they expect. And then we can craft our bylaws in as much as possible around the Democratic National Committee.
And that's something that we're going to do later in the agenda, because we have a section to talk about what resources do we need, and a copy of the state bylaws and the national bylaws is an example. So we're going to make sure that, we have those downloaded and saved in a Google folder or something, so that every member of this committee, which everyone's already seen those things, but then you'll have quick and easy access to those documents and resources that we need.
Yeah, add state code to that too.
State code, yes, definitely. And there's time on the agenda for us to talk about that. So if we can, let's hold it until then. But Mac, I also see your hand up.
I wanted to speak a little bit to both of the last speaking points. As a parliamentarian, there is something that we talk about quite a bit in chained organizations. A chained organization being a central organization that has chapters, that has chapters, that has chapters. The Democratic Party is an example of that organization, and something that is very important within those organizations when dealing with large numbers of volunteer members is the concept of mirroring. That is where the subsequent lower bylaws mirror as much as possible the bylaws that have greater precedence. Because volunteer members do not devote their time professionally to an organization, they do not often know where to go to answer questions up the chain. So that is something that we need to look at. I've put forth language in the Slack on a number of articles that I take as much effort as I can to mirror higher bylaws within the organization. The national bylaws being an example of that, as well as federal and state law. There is something that I think gets to the heart of this, and I'm going to use terms that people have a negative connotation with, and I apologize for that. But whenever we're speaking of the type of organization that we want to form, yes, we can be very strict in our guidelines. We can define very precise procedures, but we have to remember that bylaws are a very rigid document. And that type of leadership style is a very centralized, strong leadership style. It does provide very clear direction. Its weakness is that it is not adaptive. Now, if we do believe as a bylaws committee that we can prescribe procedures for a variety of circumstances, most of which should cover anything that would come up, that is a possible way that we could go, philosophically speaking. Or we can create what is called a weak organizational structure. And that connotation is often seen very negatively, but it is a weak organizational structure in that it empowers those who have been elected to represent, to lead. And it is adaptive. It is able to react to situations that come up proactively and solve them in a way that uses something equivalent to jurisprudence to accomplish its goals. And there is no right or wrong way to do this, just because we connotate these with strong and weak. Both have advantages and both have disadvantages. And that is something philosophically that this committee should have some very serious discussions about which way we prefer to lean. So I see the floor.
Is it possible, because I mean, I could see arguments for, having things in the bylaws that at times are very rigid and inflexible because that's just the way things need to be. But then in other times, empowering people with the, what they need to be able to make judgment calls, because we can't foresee every possible governing scenario. Does it have to be one or the other, or could it be a little of column A and a little of column B?
The hope is it's a lot of column A and a lot of column B, but that's up to us to prescribe and to use our judgment to come down to, it's more important that we define amongst ourselves what belongs in column A and what belongs in column B. That's more of our job than anything. We're never going to create a document that truly has procedures for every instance that overcomes, and it would be very unwise to give all the power over to individuals for reasons that I think everyone in this committee can think of that are very recent in history. So the hope is we can come up with a framework where we are accurately, or at least to our satisfaction, defining what goes in column A and what goes in column B. That's our goal as a bylaws committee.
Okay, understood.
If something,
I really agree with that. Oh, I just wanted to
Go
say
ahead.
I really agree with those points, Mac, and I really respect and appreciate the commitment today to that, because I think our process as a committee will speak to that. So today's framing of the meeting of having this just be a process-oriented meeting and speaking to how we will do this will be just as important as what we put into this document or what we take away from this document. And I think that's important for us to keep in mind as we move through this. I know there will be a lot of striking through and inserting and specifics, but we also, like Deb brought up earlier, we want to make sure we keep the big picture in focus. And so I think your points really spoke to that, Mac, of finding the balance, making it an adaptive document, but making it specific enough where we address things and people do feel like they can go to this for answers and understand the answers that they're looking for. So those are some of my goals.
Judy, did you have something? Okay. Yeah, and I'll just keep this discussion open until we are ready to move to the next topic. Selena, I do see you raising your hand.
Yeah. So in terms of, I loved Deb's verbiage that she said, that the broad strokes. And when I think of, I think when we think about bylaws, it's very easy to think of, article such and such, section such and such, and I live in that world. I love that stuff, but that is a means to an end, and the end that I would like to see us end up at is to have a document that has a lot of buy-in, so that we have a lot of input from people with different backgrounds and information and visions, and but we can end up a document with a lot of stakeholders, and that document really be the foundation and the infrastructure for building a party that can win elections. At bottom, what we need is a party to elect people to put policy in place to make lives better for West Virginia. So that's like the higher goal, in my opinion. And then we have to have a party a strong party that can do that, that can elect people and that are going to do that. And then how do we build that strong party? And to me, these bylaws are an essential part of that. And the sort of words that come into mind to what I would like to see, like the adjectives sort of to describe these bylaws, and what they do is to create a party that is open, that is inclusive, diverse, yeah, I think it also has to, and this is a little bit in the weeds, I think that it has to make sure that there's a lot of things in. I mean, I have very, very familiar with these bylaws. There are things in there. There's no direction for caucuses. There's a little bit of direction for county committees. So I think we don't have to define everything, but there has to be, there are some things that are just very, very much lacking, that I think that we can provide direction to, or to groups that very much want direction and want to build. But big picture is to create a foundation for a party that can win elections and make things better for West Virginians. Thank you.
I'm keeping an eye on time here, and we'll need to move on from this topic here in a couple minutes, but we still have some time. But let me double check. Is there anybody who hasn't spoken on this yet that wants to speak? And then Mac, I see your hand up, so I'm going to give you the last word, but let me just see if anybody who hasn't spoken yet wants to speak. And if not, then I'll let you close this out before we move to the next topic. Not seeing anything. All right, go ahead, Mac.
I think it's important for us to do kind of a team building activity, and this kind of fits in very well with what Selena was saying, and this will kind of close off the section. I would like, and I encourage whenever I do bylaw revisions with the committee, for them to kind of pick out 3 words, or at most a short phrase, that kind of describes what they want to get out of the process, what they believe is important for the process. Selena named 3 right off the top of her head, but I would like, maybe as a closing point in this section, for everyone to name off the 3 key elements that they are looking for in this bylaws revision process. That way, and I'd like for whoever is taking notes to note them so that we can refer back to them. I'll be happy to throw myself under the bus and start. About 2 years ago, I did an in-depth dive of the West Virginia Democratic Party bylaws as a parliamentarian. And there were 3 key aspects of the bylaws that I felt were missing. I believe that they were not goal-oriented. An organization needs a goal, it needs a mission, it needs it to be clearly defined. So one of the things I'd like to see us get out of this is that these bylaws make us a goal-oriented organization. Another thing that I felt was very lacking in the previous bylaws, or the current iteration of the bylaws, was that they did not provide clear processes of accountability when very explicit things were not followed. There was a very sincere lack of accountability in the bylaws, and that is something that I would very much like to see change. And the last thing, and this comes from my personal beliefs, economically, I am more to the left, but on the terms of the power scale, I very much believe that if you spread power among a larger population, a larger demographic, that it has a tendency to naturally correct from very dangerous viewpoints. And it tends to help the masses more. So one of the things I'd like to see us create is an empowering document for our voters and citizens across the state, and ultimately to affect the country. So my 3 words would be goal-oriented, accountability, and empowering. And if anyone wants to back off, follow up with that, I'd be happy to hear everyone out. And I'd love to hear everyone out, because this is the kind of thing that provides a goalpost or a lantern at the night for us to strive towards as we go through this very complex and ultimately, while we're going through it, it's confusing. And then in the end, we look back and we're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. But we need a goalpost to run towards. So I'm trying to create that now.
No, that seems more than reasonable. Well, I'll just go by the order of the squares on my screen here, but I'll throw myself under the bus next. since I could steal your answers because they were really good, but I'll come up with my own, I guess. So I'll say fair, firm, and clear. I think that's what I would like to see out of these new bylaws. Selena? Oh wait, you kind of
Yeah,
already
I'm going to
so
stick
sorry.
with mine, you know, openness, diversity, inclusion.
Bob?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have three, but clarity is my most important one on these. So that people know how things are supposed to work and that they can understand what's being said.
Deb?
I think we need a document that has integrity. Integrity is my go-to word these days. There's such a lack of it out there. So I would like us to make sure that this document is full of integrity. I would like there to be strong guidance. Robbie and I just had a scenario, and we looked to the bylaws for help with how to handle what was happening on our county committee. No answer. We're winging it. So strong guidance would be awesome. I think thirdly, something that incorporates ideals, and I mean shoot for the moon ideals, like make it a little idealistic. I think when we get into the weeds and we hammer out all those little nitpicky details, we kind of lose sight of the ideals that make the Democratic Party great. So I think ideals is one of my words.
Judy?
Continuity. If it says something on this page and says something totally different on this page, that is very confusing and can be really bad in certain circumstances. I think inclusivity is very important, and clear language. I think that what we are saying needs to be understandable. There's no room for, well, I interpret it this way or whatever. That it has to say what it says and mean what it says.
Maria?
I don't think she heard you.
I don't think so. Maria, you're up.
Shane, did you call on me?
Yeah.
I did.
Was
yes.
that me? Okay, great. I have some service trouble that I'm working through. So thank you. But I think the two that are coming to mind for me are the first is effective. I think that these should be clear, easy to use, easy to understand for anyone. And then the second one that I have is inclusive. And that is true for both the process and the outcome. I really hope that people feel like they are reflected, their values are reflected in this document. So effective and inclusive are the two I'm going to go with. More to come.
And Ray. Ray, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good.
Okay. Yeah, I basically just diversity, just echo what Maria said, just fairness, basically.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Ray. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, I'm done. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for sharing that, and I think that does give us a decent big picture idea or a vision to focus on. There we go. Wow, it's a Friday night. You can tell I've had a long week. I'm like fumbling my words. So let's go ahead and you know what? I'm going to switch the order here because we had what do we need and then what's our process going to be. I think what we need is going to be pretty clear cut no matter what process we adopt. And since we're having a big picture talk, I think it makes more sense to talk about the process before we talk about what we need and then kind of wrap up and set some goals for the next meeting. So I'm just going to swap that around if there's no objection to that. Not hearing any. Okay. So this is so basically the question here is what's going to be our process, because how you edit a document as lengthy as a bylaw document, you could do it a lot of different ways. We talked about earlier, there's strike insert, there's scrap and to totally redo it. We could delegate to certain people to we discuss amongst ourselves, and then we delegate writing of certain sections to certain people and proofread what they write. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do this. Selena, I know we had talked a couple of days ago, and you had an idea for a workflow that I think makes sense. But I want to open up to you to share that, but then open up to others to A, provide feedback on that, or B, sort of provide their own idea for what the methodology should look like. So with that, I'm going to yield the floor to Selena first.
Thank you, Shane. So I've been thinking about these bylaws for a very, very long time. And when we went through the memorandum of understanding process, I had, drafted, a lot of stuff that I felt like needed to be included. But when I think about the goals that I just talked about having this big picture of having stakeholders and a process to really, really build the party. When I think about that and the process that kind of I think would help us get to the end game with that, is to kind of do what we're doing, this very big picture. Where do we want to go? What are our ideals? What are our values? And really hold that very close to us. But then also, I thought we were going to talk resources first, but this is fine. What resources do we need? We've already mentioned a couple different things. We need a copy of, the state bylaws. We need a copy of the state code, and the state code 319 is a big part of it, electing county committees and state executive committees. But there's also, how do we DNC committee woman and state conventions, and so there's different parts of the state code, and so we need to make sure that we have the relevant state code pieces. That's a resource. The national charter and the DNC bylaws. There is a very, very important piece of policy from the national party, which is the 6 basic elements of an open party. And there's a lot of history behind that, but at bottom, every state party is required to incorporate those elements into the party rules. And so, and they used to be, by the way, they used to be in there, but they're not anymore, and in ours. And so, so identifying those resources, and is there any education that we need? Are there, for lack of a better word, consultants that we might need to talk to? For instance, especially when we get into the state code part of it, is there a lawyer that really knows state code related to political parties that we would like to talk to? Is there somebody that knows some of the historical stuff that we're going to have to incorporate that we would like to talk to? So identifying the educational needs as well as the resources, and making sure that and I don't know, I kind of think of it in education, you want to have your basics together before you start building. And so what are those pieces that we might need? And maybe we don't need any, but if there is some things that we need, let's identify that and try to meet those needs. And then after we sort of have that basic information and our resources, my thought is, well, then we start with the current bylaws. We start with the preamble. And by the way, Deb, when you were talking about our, the values and how to have the idealistic stuff, I think the preamble is the perfect place to build that. Let's start out right at the beginning. What are our ideals? And but we take the preamble and have a discussion about it. We take Article 1 and have a discussion about Article 2. And instead of my suggestion, because I've been in meetings where you start striking and inserting and amending, it can go on forever, and it's very time consuming. My thought is, why don't we take a piece at a time, have a big picture discussion about it, like what is good about this already? Is there anything that we hate about it that needs to have changed? Is there anything that's in conflict with one of the governing documents that we need? So we have a discussion about what we want that article to look like, and then move on to the next article. So don't start changing it right away, just have this discussion about it. And then I don't know if it would be staff or whoever, but somehow or another, we have that somebody then drafts the article based on that, what we believe is the intent that the committee came up with. And then, it might take a meeting, 2 or 3 meetings maybe to like get through all of that, but then come back with a draft. And some of it of the current language would be okay, but but regardless, come back with a draft that of course would be distributed to everybody ahead of time, so they could look over it. But then in a meeting then that we think is, think we basically have a draft, then go into the strike and insert to sort of like fine tune it. And then anyway, so that is sort of my thought. Start out big picture and then come down, and then come down to big picture per article, and then come down to more very specific strike and insert. And I also want to say in this that I'm not opposed to, if we want to keep the current bylaws and do a strike and insert. I'm also not opposed to us striking the whole old bylaws and inserting new stuff. I mean, I know a lot of the problems in the current bylaws, and a lot of it goes to what Judy was saying earlier. It's been patchwork together, and that big headache that she had this past summer is because a Band-Aid was being put over something rather than looking at the big picture. So I'm not opposed to, if we end up doing very, just creating new, striking the all, inserting all new, but we don't have to make that decision today. But anyway, I'm throwing that out as a suggestion of a process. I'm sure it needs build upon, and there's details that I haven't thought of, but that sort of is the skeleton process that I'm just throwing out for your all's consideration.
And when you had mentioned that to me, I mean, it seems like pretty reasonable, because I've definitely been in a lot of county committee meetings where we spend 20 minutes in a meeting arguing over like 4 words. And like, it is the most excruciating, like awful thing to do it. But now, having said that, we're revising a 20-page document. Like, we're going to be debating over words. But if we're not trying to write them in the meeting, but like, we have a draft prepared and bring it to the meeting and then strike and insert or whatever on that draft, that seems like a minimally disruptive way to handle it. But I'm open to any ideas, and we should be open to all ideas. So does anybody have comments on either like this kind of a system, or questions, or how do you envision us like doing this rewrite? So I'll just open up the floor to whoever. Bob, go ahead.
I think Selena makes a lot of sense in her idea of what the process should be.
I agree.
Mac, I see your hand up.
I like the idea of us not initially drafting the language and then coming back in a separate meeting and arguing over those finer points. I think that is a good way to streamline discussion. One thing that I've ran into in processes past of doing this is that it is very easy to either be so far up in the sky that you don't see how, whenever things are put into finer details, they come into conflict and the gears grind, or to be so intent on lubing the gears of the machine and making sure that they run properly that you don't see that the whole thing's running off a cliff. So one of the things that we have done to combat that process in the past is we have broken these committees up into sub teams. Usually it's done by article. For various size documents, you can do it other ways, but the idea is there is a person or people who are supposed to be who are supposed to be intimately familiar with with each article. And if you want to do it the way that I have found to be the most successful, you actually assign each article 2 teams or 2 people. One who is supposed to be familiar intimately with it and in support of its good points, and one person who is supposed to be attempting to reform it. And then the committee as a whole has their own sections, and then we are debating the bigger document that we then bring into pieces later. And I believe that that type of process, in conjunction with an outside drafting based on our notes by a clerk or maybe a volunteer secretary, who we can then nitpick over the precision of that language in a separate meeting, that could give us the happy medium between the macro view and the micro view, and also allow us to sort out during the process the clarity of the document, which so many members here have said that they have a problem with, and its consistency. Because if the person who's intimately familiar with Article 1 says something that is in conflict with the person who's intimately familiar with Article 7, that's going to become readily apparent quickly. And that will allow us to bring consistency into the document quickly without all of us droning over all 20, or by the time we're done, probably 40 pages of this document. We break it up into pieces and we tackle it as a team.
My only concern with the small groups is I like that the idea of that, Mac, but my only concern with it is that we then become intimately familiar with certain sections. But I do think there's like a report back mechanism that we'll have to do, and maybe the debate covers that. But everyone may want to have a full understanding of the whole document. So I think we have kind of 2 options. One is what Mac just suggested, of like we have certain people or groups of 2 who take certain sections, or that like each meeting could be as a whole, and then we're taking smaller sections at a time, but as a whole group. So I think it could go either way. I'm not necessarily in favor of one or the other, but just want everyone to be involved in all parts, and maybe you have a solution for that, Mac. I see your hand.
All that, I'm sorry, I put it down.
I muted myself. Nikki does have her hand up.
Another way you could possibly do it is, say you divide it up, say 2-3 articles at a time, give it a deadline. So Article 1 through 3, Article 3 through 6, and then have different teams. Well, everyone can do those. It's just you're getting intimately familiar with smaller parts of the bylaws to where you can kind of go through, have them maybe not work up language, but have it to where you have an outline of things you would like to add and things that you would like to change, come together for the next meeting, go, all right, here's what we like, here's what we don't like, hash it out. And then the next meeting, have the next few bylaws, and then just keep doing it that way, perhaps breaking it down to a smaller section rather than actual language, but have an outline. And because at some point language matters, but at that point language is also the one of the last things you need to worry about for that fact anyway.
Was that, I'm just checking, Nikki, was that you, all you had?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. No, it's okay. Bob, your hand was up first, and then Deb raised hers.
Okay. One of the things that occurs to me as we were starting to talk about this is that a couple of the concepts that run throughout the whole bylaws is the concept of how you give notice to people and how much notice you get. Whether they're mostly 14 days or 30 days for elections and bylaw changes, but then there's a question of how you give that notice and who you give it to, and including whether it's published in a local newspaper or not. All those things I think are run through the whole document and will need to be addressed probably as a group so that they're consistent throughout the document.
All right. Nikki, I think your hand is up from earlier. Okay, yeah, there it goes. Deb, go ahead.
I'd like to throw another word on our list, flow. This document needs to flow so that when you refer to it, you're not flipping through pages, trying to look for what you need and picking it out here. And then, oh, wait a minute, 5 pages later, there's another mention of this topic. So you're flipping back and forth through trying to find the answer. And sometimes what's on page 3 doesn't match what's on page 7. Been there. So I think flow is important. Make it a readable document so that when county chairs, county vice chairs are trying to get familiar with it, there is a sensible flow to the document so you can kind of get the big picture, like where everything is, so that when you need to reference it, you have an idea and you're not flipping through 20 pages looking for that one piece that you need. Flow. I think we need to pay attention to flow. And I think if we break everything into pieces, our language is going to fracture. You know, it's going to be hard to make the language flow through a 20 or Max says 40-page document. So I think we need to work this together so that our language is consistent and we maintain flow. I don't know. That's what I think.
So I don't think I've spoken to this yet. So I'm going to take my time before we go back to folks who are adding additional comments. I think my opinion is I see merits for like both systems, and honestly, I think they're pretty similar. I think where I see the crux of one, like something we have to decide is how do those sections get drafted? So let's say, for example, article, like, because we're going to review everything as a group no matter what. Like there will be a time where we as a committee come together and look at article, like a rewritten version of Article 2, and then, you know, discuss amongst ourselves and maybe strike and insert to clean up language or do whatever. But like in Mac's example, I think what it is the people who are intimately charged, like let's say, you know, Deb and Judy are working on Article 2. They're probably, I assume in that scenario, they're going to be the ones that actually draft that section and then present it to the committee. And I can see what I think Deb said about how that could lead to sort of like using different voices and different languages and different sections and how that could be disruptive. But then in Selena's suggestion, one thing that I think we would need to clarify is who writes those sections. Like I think there are, I mean, I'm not necessarily, I like to write, this is necessarily my favorite thing to write. So like I would rather review a section that was written by Mac or Selena or Bob or pretty much anybody on this call who's not me. I would rather review that than have different groups of people writing different sections. Like I think we would have to have a few designated people who would be like, okay, and we had this meeting, we discussed all these things we want in section 2. So Max, Selena, whoever, like you are writing this section, and then those people that would be our like authors of the sections would be charged with probably more work than the rest of us, because they would be, you know, doing a lot of writing and then bringing it to us. But if there's a smaller number of people who are doing the drafting, then I think the language and the voice of the document will be more consistent. So I think I lean in that direction. But you know, we're discussing little tiny variations here, which I think is totally fine. And I think after I see 2 hands up for Mac and Selena, I think what I would like to do after that, if time permits, and so far we're doing okay on time, but we gotta, you know, I gotta push a little bit more. But maybe we could come up with a workflow for our February 10th meeting to say, okay, it's our first meet. We're going to elect a bylaws committee chair. Once we have that done, like, what is that meeting going to look like? And I'm not saying put together the agenda just yet, but, you know, do we all need to read the bylaws in advance and come prepared with comments on Articles 1 and 2? Are we going to have somebody who's going to be doing a draft between now and February 10? Like, you know, I think there's questions that we need to answer there, which Mac, I see you putting that in the chat, but I'm actually just going to call on you now to provide that. Mac, are you there?
Sorry, I did the same thing you did with the unmute.
That's okay.
I think it's important that we have one person during the draft, whether it is we bring into the committee a drafting clerk or one member is designated to do all the drafting. I think that's important. I think we could cobble together from our opposing views an outline of things we want to change, give that to the drafting clerk. They could write it, and then that comes back to us and we do our fine debate edit. That's actually wasn't what I wanted to talk about. I agree with the workflow discussion. That really, though, should be whenever we do a process, that should be our first meeting. The thing that I actually wanted to ask of everyone, and the reason I raised my hand is, what is exactly everyone's expectation for how long this process is going to take? Because I think that is a very basic thing that we need to cover, because if some people are thinking this is going to be done in a month, or if they think this is going to take 5 years, I think we need to set an expectation there of pace and reality.
No, I think let me jump in real quick. I think that's an important point, because the state executive committee is going to need to ratify these bylaws at a meeting, and we have to give them, that meeting has to be announced with 30 days notice. And obviously we need to send them a draft well in advance of that meeting so that the members could review it and, prepare revisions and be prepared to vote and discuss it at that meeting. So I think we need to have an idea of when we expect this workflow to be done, so that we can, tell Chair Pushkin, hey, we're expecting this to be done. I'm just going to make it up, mid-April. So we could theoretically have a meeting in May or early June of the state executive committee to discuss it. But I think we need to, and maybe we don't know that right away, but I think we should at least set a goal, because that would also guide our meeting schedule. If we're going to be meeting, I think we should be meeting every 2 weeks until this is done. And if it's going to be every 2 weeks, hopefully it's not going to be more than a couple months. But we're going to have to make this, I think, all of us have to make this a big priority. And if we do that and we're diligent between meetings, communicate between meetings as much as we can without violating any procedures, and then come to the meetings, have our votes. And, I think there's ways we could do this that it would come together at a reasonable amount of time. But I think that reasonable amount of time would be a couple months at minimum. Selena, go ahead.
Well, I guess I was going to speak on process, and then we got the question about time, and I have some thoughts on that. So should I just speak to both of them?
Yeah, cover them both, because after this, all we have to do is talk about resources and then kind of set our goal. Well, resources, and I also want to figure out what our workflow will be for the first meeting. So yeah, but they're both related, so that's fine. Go ahead.
I think I'm going to speak to time first. If we had been able to, start this back in the fall, I think that was sort of like ideally for us to have something for the spring meeting. I don't know how long this process will necessarily take, especially since we have to give 30-day notice. We have to send it out to the state executive committee 30 days before. So that puts us, if there's a meeting in April, and I don't know that there is, but if there is, that means that we would have to get it out by March, and it's going to be February really soon. So I mean, personally, I don't think that I think we need to give a very clear update, if there's an April meeting, a very a good update. And there may be sections that we think is very pressing that would be ready for a vote. But if we do sort of what we're talking about, which is to have this very kind of big picture and really make this an incredible document, I don't know that I don't know that it can be done by April. But let me also say that I don't think it's unreasonable if it does take us longer that we couldn't ask Mike to call a meeting just for the bylaws. Like, in other words, have a Zoom meeting, have maybe a special meeting. This is the only thing that we're going to cover is bylaws, send it out in advance. We only have discussion about that and pass that. So I think that's a possibility. Going back to process, I just want to say that how much I really appreciate Mac's suggestion, Nikki's comments as well. And I think that really does, I like the idea of, being assigned an article and digging into that. The only thing that concerns me about that is that we did this bylaw. We chose this bylaw group very differently. I think in the past it's been either by appointment or by volunteer, and people who really are into bylaws would volunteer, and then also in the past it's just been a handful of people who one or two people work on the bylaws and everybody else is just there to rubber stamp it. And this is this group is fundamentally different, and we were elected by our state executive committee, and there's a lot of diverse people here that have a lot of different specialties and interests and things like that. And the thing that I would that I think is really great about that is if we take each section as a group, then we have a teacher and ex county chair and a county chair and a lawyer and a couple rules nerds, all looking at the same article through different lenses, and I kind of like that idea. I do recognize that it might take a little bit longer and maybe it's not a perfect process, but I'm really excited about the different angles that when we look at something, I know like I know what I like and don't like about the different articles, but I'm really anxious to as we look through it, and like me and Judy have lots of conversations, and she sees things and notices things from her experiences that I never would, and because she has different experiences as being a county chair. So anyway, that is sort of my take on again on the process, and I'm going to be quiet now.
So let me call on Judy, and then what I want to do, and I'm keeping in mind that we have 17 minutes until 6 o'clock, and I'm going to make sure we stay on time. I want to at least have an idea of what the workflow will be for the February 10th meeting. And even if we decide to change up our process, let's at least figure out what we're going to be doing on the 10th after we select a bylaws committee chair, and what we're going to be doing between now and then, if anything applies. So at least we have sort of a prototype process for the next meeting. And then after actually doing it, if we need to make adjustments, we certainly could. Judy, go ahead.
My thought process on this is this isn't something we can rush. We need to take the time to be thorough about it, to go through it line by line. And I don't think sectioning it off in like 2 people groups is the way to go about that, because when you come back together, then it's going to be everybody talking about it. I think I agree with Selena that we should take it section at a time and do it as a group. And that way the language is fluid, as Debbie was talking about, and we can all come to an agreement. When you do it with 2 people off here and you bring it back, then people are going to have different ideas of the way it should be worded and this kind of thing. So as a group, I think is the best idea.
Okay, so let me ask the group here, and we don't, this is informal, we're just discussing. So I think we just work on consensus, establish as much of a consensus as possible. So what does our February 10 meeting look like? Are we going to in here, maybe I'll share my screen to give us some context here. There it is. So everybody see the table of contents here? Okay, cool.
Yeah, well, I have a question though. Can I make a suggestion that you talk about resources and education before we get to that? Because I think that could have an impact on this conversation, on what we do on February 10.
Okay, well that, you know what, that's fine. We can pivot and then we'll wrap up by setting up a sample workflow, which will then kind of go into the wrap up conversation of, okay, our next meeting is here this time, and kind of set some goals. I think that's fine. Let's pivot to resources here. And we've already talked about some resources, so I'm going to list them off so we don't need to list them again. Obviously, the current bylaws, that's obvious. The sections of the state code, I think 318 might also have some stuff, but certainly 319 is the most relevant section. The national charter and bylaws of the DNC, which we have, I mean, I've got them I downloaded them for a Google Drive. I can easily, share them with people. I think Selena and Mac and other folks might have some copies too.
I do too.
There we go. So we all pretty much have these, but we're going to put them in one central place so we all have like really easy access to it. Somebody had, I think Selena or someone had mentioned, like, we might need to have some consultants or lawyers on hand to make sure we're not going to run afoul of the state code. In addition to all of this, one idea that I've had is, should we look to other state parties for inspiration? Like, for example, what does the state Democratic Party of Pennsylvania's bylaws look like, or Wisconsin, or maybe some of these battleground states where they've got to have their act together because it's a battleground state. I could see those being useful as resources. Not that we would ever try to like copy and paste from them, but the way they've outlined their bylaws might give us some inspiration for ways we handle our own. So that would be sort of like, I guess, sample bylaws from other state parties would be like a suggestion that I have as a resource. But besides that or anything else that we've listed, does anybody else have if we're going to be gathering all these things between now and February 10th, what are some other things that you would want?
Just to touch on what you just said about the other states, I was creating a handbook for Wood County, and I have that handbook. And I took parts of, I think it was from Maryland. I took things out of Maryland and kind of worked it around to try to fit our committee. So I have something like that available if you want to take a look at it.
Yeah, why not? Let's just throw everything into a folder, and what we can use, great. If we can't use something, great. And sorry,
maybe Ryan can get a few samples from other states, because I certainly don't have any. Sounds like Judy has one.
Guys, I have all of them and the territories. I have them all in folders.
Oh, well.
I'm glad to share.
All right, Mac, resources. What do you think?
I would love access. I'd love to get like a copy of that folder. I think that's a great idea to draw from the other states and territories. One thing that I have had experience with in the past, and this does not need to be in our resource folder by the 10th. However, I would like to have a sort of maybe a presidential to presidential breakdown of our finances, not a in-depth one, but maybe an outline year to year from the treasurer of the party. And the reason for that is we've already received a request to establish a new standing committee for education, community outreach, volunteerism, etc. That committee is going to require resources, and those resources are going to require funding. And while that committee is a great idea, we should not be writing rules and establishing things that our checkbook can't provide. So having that as a resource is something that is quite important, and I've ran into in the past. So I would advise that the treasurer establish some documents that show us long-term cyclical trends that we can have on hand, especially when we get to that point.
All right, thank you, Mac. Other comments on resources or things that we need to get ready for the process to begin?
One quick addition, really quick. I have a request, just echoing the request folder would be awesome, and far enough in advance before February 10th that we could really all dig into it as our homework. And then the second thing I was going to ask is just if there are any things, I know that there are, but what could be sent along to all of us about what must be included and then what can be included, what are the nice to haves, and maybe even having some expertise around that too, because we want to make sure that as we go through this process, we're not kind of including anything we can't include or not including anything we have to. So I wasn't sure if we needed to like invite someone to come in and walk us through like necessities, or if we feel like we'd be able to like facilitate that as a group. But that may be something we just want to make sure we have a group understanding on sooner rather than later.
Maria,
Selena, you're mute. Yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry. Maria, what was the first thing you said? I missed it.
I said, I'm not exactly sure which part you got, but I asked about what must be included, what are nice to haves. I talked about possibly inviting someone to come in and walk us through that if we felt we needed to as a group, but I feel like I could get more clarity on that. So whether that's in the shared folder or in some other format would be great.
Okay, thank you.
Deb, go ahead.
So piggybacking on that, I think we need some foundational learning about this. Like Maria said, what must we include? What's nice to have? What you should stay away from? I think we need some foundational learning about that. And I don't know who's an expert on that, but you know, a 20-minute like, you should have this. It would be nice if you had this, but don't do this. I think that would be great. I mean, and maybe you guys already know that. I don't know that, but maybe you already know that. So I think building blocks, you know, we need some foundational building blocks that we can jump off of. That's what I think.
All right, and 8 minutes left. So I see a couple hands up. Selena, your hand is up. Mac, yours was. I don't know if that was a mistake or not, but let me give the floor back to Selena, possibly Mac, and then we'll set up our workflow and our next steps and our homework, as the case may be.
Another governing document that we need to have is the 6 basic elements of an open party, which is policy for the Democratic Party of the United States. And I mean, I don't know if anybody knows that history, but there's a pretty compelling history to how those elements came to be, and it's fundamental to the Democratic Party, because we always talk about, people making decisions in the, the smoke-filled back rooms. And that's literally exactly how it was done and how our president was chosen and everything years ago. And then, a handful of civil rights activists busted that wide open at the 1964 National Convention. And then out of that came, opening up the party. They started having open meetings, and women were able to participate, and Black people were able to participate, blah, blah, blah. And so every state party is required to have those in their rules. And so that's definitely one of the documents that we need to have. And I don't know if anybody needs any additional information or education about that.
Okay, I just want to share everybody on some, if you haven't seen what's in the chat here, Ryan has the Zoom link for the next meeting, which has already been posted and advertised. That's February 10th. Friday, is that a Friday? Friday, February 10? I'm just checking. Yeah, that's Friday, February 10 at 4:30. So you can register for, if you click on that link while we're still in this meeting, you can sign up and register, but he's also going to email the registration link to us as well. Ryan is also going to create a Google Drive folder under the state party's Google Drive for the Rules and Bylaws Committee. So we're all going to have access to that, and that's where we'll dump all these documents and resources we're talking about. That's where we could also share like drafts of sections and all and so on. So we have like that stuff is all set up and being set up, and we'll be ready to go. With the last couple minutes here, let me ask about the workflow again, and I'll reshare my screen and let me see if I'm understanding this correctly. So what I think we have consensus for our next meeting is after electing the bylaws chair, which is the first order of business, are we just going to read through, like, here's the table of contents for the bylaws, starting with preamble, party name, intro, and then all of the subsequent articles down to page 22. So are we going to, at the next meeting, basically just go through and start reading through this? And so one section at a time, having a big picture talk about, you know, the good and the bad, the ugly, and then submitting that to, like Max said, you know, the person who would be drafting it. And then we come back at the next meeting, spend some time discussing the big picture stuff, but also revising the past document? Or are we going to spend the next maybe 1 to 2 meetings reading through everything and then drafting? And maybe we don't have to answer that right now, but for the February 10th, what is our process? Are we just starting on page 3 and going as far as we can, or like what else would we be doing? Judy, go ahead.
I don't think we're going to really change too much on the preamble, party name and emblem, or introduction into the bylaws. I think that's pretty basic and probably will stay the same. I do think that the basic elements for an open party and going down to maybe organization of the State Democratic Executive Committee would be a good place to start to go through those. If we're going to do our meetings in 1.5 hour chunks, that might even be biting off more than we can chew. But the basic elements for an open party, I think that that is one thing that Deborah is really concerned about. And we are too. You know, we need to go through that and address it, and qualifications of participants, because that relates to inclusivity.
I would actually push back a little bit, Judy, on preamble and the party name. Well, maybe party name, not so much, but I think the preamble is a place. When you think of the Constitution, what do you think of? We the people, right? So that preamble, I think, can be a place to put in some of that aspirational, idealistic, that big picture stuff, and kind of bold that out. But certainly that is, you know, that is not as critical as like organizing the state executive committee, right? But I think I would make an argument for starting on the preamble and you know, working through there.
Okay. Yeah, I agree.
But is that so, like, is that like what I suggested? Is there consensus on that being the process for the meeting, or are we gonna do it a different way?
My recommendation, I think it could be, it could get pretty long and tedious if we don't have a specific section that we at least are trying to get through next time. So my recommendation, or something I'll put on the table, is to possibly review some foundational materials next time that we're all going to look into between now and then. And sorry about the dog. And then, so foundational materials, and then to maybe take the up through the introduction of the next meeting. So maybe we just review the preamble, the emblem, and the what was the next? Yeah, and the introduction, just for the next meeting, to start to get a feel for what our process, because I feel like we're at time and we haven't really decided what we want our process to look like. So maybe that's an amount that we can bite off that we feel like we could do for the next meeting.
And I'm just going in order of the hands, Mac.
I do believe that our flow through the bylaws should be more chronological. The one thing that we haven't discussed a lot of is how we will handle things that aren't in the bylaws that need change, because we're going to hit sections, for example, related to inclusivity. In that section of an open party, how do you handle inclusivity in online meetings? We have no online meeting rules. While Robert's Rules of Order provides some minor guidance, that is something that explicitly suggests organizations put in the bylaws explicitly, is what are your rules for an online meeting? So I would kind of suggest sort of a chronological approach through the bylaws at this time. I think the big things for that first meeting are going to be the chair election, appointment of a secretary, if we want to have a writing clerk, them, and then figuring out how everyone tackles homework, because this is going to be a homework intense committee, and providing some accountability for that.
Can I ask you to clarify a little more on what, like, does chronological mean starting on page 3 and going to 22, or is that like
Sequential? My bad. I'm sorry. I should have said.
okay?
Yeah.
But so you're saying start at the beginning of the document and work to the end in sequence.
And the best way that I have seen, the other way would be to have kind of a straw poll and find out where there is the most consensus. I believe in strength-based learning. You start where everyone is in agreement. You knock out all of that first, and then that lets you get through a lot of progress. And then with what time you have left, really dig into the things that you disagreed on. So either starting at the beginning and working through the document in order, or we take a straw poll and start in the places where we have a lot of consensus, because we have members who are inexperienced with this process and we have members who are experienced with this process, and working through the things where there are more consensus will give experience to the members that don't have that. And it will help build them up for those more difficult discussions. So that is the alternative method that you could go with.
Okay, Selena, you're still muted.
Okay, sorry about that. So I think that I agree with sequential. Just I think it's just easier to, and I think it sort of flows that way. But aside from that, I guess one of the things that I think that what I was suggesting when I was talking about the big picture process is, and before we jump into going, article by article, is to take this list that we just came up with in terms of, what do we need? What are the consultants that we need to talk to? Or is there any of this foundational stuff? Like, for instance, Maria said, we kind of need a checklist of, what is, or is there a list of what's in the national charters and bylaws that we absolutely have to make sure that we include? Well, if we don't have that first and we don't have a discussion about that, and we start jumping into articles, then we are, and then we learn that information later, then we have to go back and relook at that. So I'm thinking, why don't we use the next meeting as much as possible to try to get all this foundational learning taken care of, like get all these pieces. And we're not going to get everything, but as much as we can. Could we have Nick Casey come and do the thing that Mac mentioned? Do we have, somebody that can, lawyer maybe on hand to talk to us about some of the tricky state code stuff and how to incorporate that, so there might be these use that meeting for foundational stuff. And if we have time, then we can go into starting sequentially. If not, then we'll have that foundation to then start, hit the ground running at our next meeting. So those are my thoughts on it.
I think I agree with everything that's been said so far, with the caveat that the preamble, party name and emblem, and intro to bylaws, as you see here, is literally these 3 paragraphs. So I think it's more than feasible to say that we could use a little bit of the time in the next meeting to sort of practice our process by at least looking at these, if we're not going to get into the article 1 right away. I think we could, we can handle 3 paragraphs as a test run of how we're going to, edit things for a much longer term basis. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, generally I agree with going through sequentially, but one thing I think we should consider at some point, probably early on, is what we want that sequence to be. For instance, Article 8 is the Affirmative Action Committee under diversity. It might be better placed earlier up, along with any other standing committees, up under organization of the State Democratic Executive Committee and shove 5, 6, and 7 on down. There's been a proposal to include another standing committee that Mac addressed, and I don't know whether it makes sense, and I haven't looked it over really closely, but that could also go in that area. We might want to think about what sequence makes sense before we start going through sequentially.
Okay. Well, I think everybody who was going to speak to this has spoken to this. I don't know that this has necessarily left us with a clear workflow for the next meeting, but I think we're closer to having consensus on what the next meeting will look like. And it's probably nothing that we couldn't wrap up with a few back and forth emails to kind of, solidify things and actually set our agenda. So since it is after 6, I do want to, work toward calling this to a close. And if I can review this, make sure I have this right. If anybody wants to correct me, please do so. Between now and the 10th, we're all going to get access to the Google Drive folder so we can start, putting documents in there and also like beginning the review of the resources that we're going to be utilizing. So our homework is going to be to, read through all that stuff between now and the 10th and really get the wheels turning. That's the first thing. And then we need to set our agenda, which we will do between now and the next meeting. And then we will, at the meeting itself, besides having the election of the bylaws committee chair, we'll talk about more of the foundational stuff, and kind of maybe do a little more big picture discussion before beginning the process, at least, at a very small level, modeling our editing process. Does that seem like a reasonable second meeting? Did I summarize that appropriately?
What do we want to, as part of our homework, going to be to try to fill in these, if we need a consultant or somebody, if there's somebody that would help in these areas, to ask them to be at least available, or email to say, do you want this person to be on the next call to answer questions or anything like that?
So I think that's an ongoing conversation. I think at least what we can be doing right now is thinking about if we're going to pull people into these meetings to be a resource for us. For example, Nick Casey, as treasurer, if we were to have stuff in here that we need to consult with him on, let's have a conversation with Nick and make sure he's open to coming to one of these meetings and talking about it. But I don't think we need to go as far as lining up speakers for the next meeting. Let's just start with a list of who we might call on during this process and then go from there. And as for appointing a secretary, okay, I know we're at past time, but I need to ask this before we go. We didn't put out an announcement on electing a secretary. So what is the process of appointing a secretary? Once the bylaws committee chair is elected, do they appoint? Is the committee going to appoint? What do we do? How do we do that so that we make sure we're in order?
Well, the secretary,
between now and the 10th.
According to the bylaws, the secretary, one of the secretaries serves at will of the chair. So it would seem to me like that would be a selection from the chair.
Well, that's the resident secretary, which is different from a recording secretary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, secretaries are normally elected.
I think we should just do volunteers and then go ahead and have an election, which would mean doing a 30-day notice. But we'd basically have, another volunteer note taker at the next meeting, and then at the meeting after that, we just elect somebody, and that way we don't have to think about it. We just go through that process.
If somebody intends to run for secretary, then I think they're going to take notes at the next meeting. So
yeah, I was thinking maybe we could do it by consensus and not have to worry about notice for folks running. I suspect there won't be a lot of competition, but
well, that's exactly the question that we have to address, because the bylaws say 30 days election or 30-day notice for an election, right? But that's very black and white right now, but that's geared towards situations where you need to give adequate public notice to encourage public participation. Whereas this is an internal committee, it's more closed. We're going to elect a secretary from the membership of this committee. So it's a little bit different, but the bylaws don't allow for that exception right now, which might be something we need to put in them.
Yeah, I agree that it does. This is not the first time that has held us up, but at the same time, 30-day notice has fundamentally changed this state party. So we have to be, careful about it. But currently it says that all meetings have that. So anyway, the other thing I just wanted to quickly say, and this is to address what Bob was saying, that you're exactly right. The articles do need to be moved around, and I think that we should definitely look at that throughout this process.
Okay, so as we wrap up here, let's just say this. We know we have a chair election scheduled, and the secretary part will handle. If you are interested, and we're not going to do this now on the meeting because we're past time, but if you are interested in either running for bylaws committee chair or serving as secretary, make it known to the group. Just send it out via email. That way we know who's throwing their hat in for both roles, and then we can just figure it out the next meeting. But I think that's a good place for us to end for today, and then get ready to start for the 10th.
And you could go ahead and send out a notice tomorrow, since we're going to have meetings every 2 weeks. Drop my pop. If we're going to have meetings every 2 weeks, if you send out a notice tomorrow advertising the secretarial position, then that would make it possible for us to do it beginning of March.
Are we agreeable to doing this every 2 weeks?
The next meeting is 3 weeks, right?
I think it might be 3. Yeah, it's February 10th.
Oh, okay. But then
Oh.
after that, every 2 weeks? Or do we want to make it weekly and try to get this stuff done as quickly as possible? It's up to you guys.
I'm retired, so
I'm up for either, but I don't love doing this on Friday nights. Well, I guess it's Friday afternoon, but we might want to revisit that. I think weekly might be a little much. I think every 2 weeks is probably reasonable. With the understanding that we're going to be doing a little bit of stuff in between. There's going to be people drafting sections, or we can have some side discussion. We just can't take any official votes outside of the context of a meeting. So I think bi-weekly to me makes sense, but maybe or maybe not Fridays. And let's talk about that later.
Well, let me ask you this question. Do you guys want me to go ahead and notice the secretary position? And if so, what's the date are we going to use?
Well, if we have a meeting on Friday, the 10th of February, we could say now that our next meeting would be Friday after that, Friday, February 24th. And we at least have a meeting scheduled for February, and then we can look at, changing the day after that. But would everybody be amenable to February 10 and February 24 for meeting days?
works for me.
Yes.
Is there anybody who
Works for
can
me.
make that?
Okay, we'll do.
Well, I didn't hear from Nikki and Mac. Mac, I know your work schedule is kind of crazy. Are you able to, this far out, are you able to say or do you know that you'll be free in those times? Okay, Nikki put in the chat they can do anytime on Fridays. So I think that's consensus on February 10 and February 24. And we could actually elect a secretary on the 24th then, because that's well over 30 days if we notice it in the next couple.
And then we could have a discussion about possibly moving it to a more convenient night, because I saw Mac notated he didn't really care for Fridays either. So
yeah, that was Maria wrote not on Fridays is my preference. Yeah, so I think we'll grin and bear it for February, just because we already had part of that set up, and then long term we can find something a little more workable.
Yeah, it shouldn't be as difficult to do it with 8 people as it is with the whole.
Right.
It took us forever to come up with a day for Wood County. We fought about it for 2 meetings. I finally said, okay, we're going to do it here.
I was gonna say, you've got 48 seats down there, and Kanawha has 72, and I can't even freaking imagine. I've got 24, and that's a lot. Well, not all 24 are filled, but I can have up to 24 people on the Mon County committee, and that's a pretty big group. So I like this small 8-person plus parliamentarian group.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, it's 6:15. Sorry, Kate, for keeping us a little over, but I think we needed a couple extra minutes to really, make our long-term plans, and we're hitting, I think, a decent consensus here. So if there's no other discussion that's very pressing, I think we are good to adjourn, but let me just open up to the group one last time.
Well, thank you to everybody. And Shane, thank you for stepping up and being willing to share this one.
See you in 3 weeks.
Y'all have a good one.
Have a good weekend, y'all.
See you later,
Bye.
y'all.
Thanks. Bye.